Welcome all. Welcome to the talk of integrating snapshot testing, and welcome all to Xebia once again. We are now based in the Amsterdam office. Our main office is in Hilversum. This is the office where we have the unit of Go Data Driven, where they do the data science part of Xebia. I'm part of the unit for software development, so Xebia software development. Where I currently work for 2 years already on the ING app in Amsterdam. And last year we also did a CocoaHeads, where I also did a talk, and also was about ING, where I talked about mainly focusing on frameworks and scaling up the mobile project. So this again was a thought of me because I thought we could integrate snapshot testing because it has some benefits, which I'll explain shortly. This talk will be about my investigation about snapshot testing, what it can give you, and it was also about just once again a talk. And not about the next Swift thing or the next architecture thing, but mainly focusing on like iOS development testing in general. What it is that we have to, what I'm going to talk about today. So, what is snapshot testing? Of course, I think going over that is nice to do because who of you ever heard of snapshot testing? Okay. And who has it currently in their current project? Not that much then compared to who have heard of it. So to summarize and to go over what snapshot testing is. Snapshot testing is basically a view-based testing where we can test a view of an app comparing to a reference image. So we have a reference image on the left, and we have the tested image in the middle, and there's a difference, and the difference is on the right. And snapshot testing then provides you the feedback what is different compared to the reference image. And it focuses on the UI view once again. And when we compare this to the other strategies of testing, we have a bunch of them, like unit testing or manual testing or UI testing, where UI testing is more for testing flows, unit testing more for testing a small logic piece of code. When we focus on snapshot testing, it falls like right in between because, it's not about the unit itself, but it's also not about the whole integration, so it falls right in between. And when we go to talk about the advantages, then it can create an extra advantage because it can give confidence on that the UI is correct compared to where we said that the UI is correct versus what we have created now, and it can give an opportunity to introduce the developer or like the designer to actually give feedback or approve your design that you created in code. So with a bit of fantasy, you can say that the designer can approve your merge request because you introduced a new view which you created a snapshot for. So the designer can then approve your reference image. The disadvantage is that it can lead to a lot of images, which result to a lot of disk size, or like size on the repository. And when we have a large repository, then this also leads to bad developer experience when you have to push or pull. So we also don't want that. Later on, I will go and talk more about how we can mitigate this problem. And we cannot do animations, so it's more based for static UI. So for the Bankier app, Let's go over example. We have an overview and we have the account which you can go to. And when we look at what it has inside these views, it has a lot of cells or list item cells. It has a couple of differences with them. So they have cells without icons and they have cells with icons. They have double lines, subviews, and single sublines. So, but we also see some cells that are identical across these views. So when we want to create reference images, we don't want to create reference images of the same cells each time. We want to look at like a common denominator where we say, hey, this is the test for the list item cell, and everyone who uses this list item cell don't have to create the snapshot again because it's already approved for. So we want to be efficient in what we test and where we want to test snapshots for. So don't overdo it. So how I think we could do it at ING is, well, we could make good use of the framework approach we use right now. So we've created a bunch of frameworks where each framework has its own responsibility. And when we have the higher level frameworks like transactions and products, they also use lower level frameworks like Foundation and Stowkit. And Foundation holds more of the foundational part of ING, like the date formatters, but Stowkit holds all the UI. So let's start with integrating snapshot tests for Stowkit because that's where all the common denominators are in. So when we do that, when we start up the test app, we have all these UI elements for the cells, for example, because taking the same examples as before, we can see the cells. And also these cells look quite similar with what we had in the first example. We have cells that have an icon on the left and have a label on the right and have a single subview, a sublabel, and a double sublabel. So when we want to think about how we're going to create these snapshots, starting with Stowkit only already gives a high coverage of what we have efficiently can test. So when we now know what to test, let's compare what is available in performing snapshot tests. So snapshot testing isn't default available from Xcode, but there are open source projects. One of these is probably you have known as Facebook Snapshot. It's around since 2013. It's created in Objective-C. But now Uber has taken over it. It's now called iOS Snapshot. Not very specific anymore. So in this presentation, I would like to call it in the old name, Facebook Snapshot, because there is another open source project which has recently created. It's called Snapshot Testing, and it's from Point Free. It's a company. I think it's from Brooklyn, but they also create a video series about Swift, and they're pretty high into functional programming, and it's completely written in Swift. So for this like example or like investigation, I wanted to compare these two frameworks. So when I did this, I wanted to come up with some criteria for this comparison. So once I created the criteria, I investigated the frameworks. I thought, well, this should be or could be a nice criteria to compare these two with. So with each framework, with each test, I want to specify a size because I have iPhone and iPad. I want to also control the size for each test. What I also want is for developer experience, I want to know which tests are failing and which ones are passing, but which ones are failing, I want to know what the difference is in the image. What's the difference in the image compared to the reference image and the speed. I want to know in comparison how much one framework is faster than the other. If it's significantly faster, then it's a good choice to choose the faster one, of course. So let's go over the criteria. So we have the specify size. So the iOS app for ING works on an iPad and an iPhone. So we want to specify, once again, the sizes for each like phone or size. So we can do that with the 0.3 snapshot in a very swifty way by just assigning the size to it. So we can assign, like instantiate a cells view controller, and then assure the snapshot matching this instance as an image. There's also a recursive description, which I'll talk about later. But what it can not only do is images, but also something different, which I'm going to talk about. So what this leads to in the images is, of course, iPad snapshots and iPhone snapshots. So if you go over the Facebook snapshot, you can only specify one view. You cannot specify a size for each test. What you can do to then say, hey, I want to make a snapshot for an iPad, is then run a simulator on an iPad. So you have to run your test twice. While with the other, like 0.3 snapshot framework, you can do that in one go, because it will take the size that you give it to the function. So that's what I think is better and more flexible. So that concludes the specify size. Let's go over the second part, and it's the support for multiple data types. People who have worked with Facebook Snapshot before probably only know snapshotting with images, but when we go over the description of like what the whole idea behind this is that the creator of this framework looked at JavaScript, and they looked at Jest. And Jest is a sort of a standard within the JavaScript world for testing. And what they can do is snapshotting, but not snapshotting of images, but snapshots of code. So what you see here is an example of what Jest can do, is that they have a JavaScript function which is pretty weird, but for the example case, they did it where they just output a math random number, so every time it's the wrong number. But the thing is that you don't have to compare it with a static value like equals 1769. You just say to match snapshot. It will record it, it will save it for you, and then if it's wrong, it's wrong. You don't have to like remember the value it has to test it with. So this same approach is being used for this 0.3 snapshot framework, where you can snapshot everything. This is handy, for example, when you use a URL request. So what you can do is then not use it as an image, but you can have a URL request and then have a snapshot as raw. The added benefit of this is that you could create a unit test for this where you would test the email output. But with this, you can automatically have a snapshot of also the post and the cookie. It's maybe not important right now, but in one go you have a test that does all of that. Furthermore, there is also the approach of doing a snapshot for your plist, because you don't want to change your plist while you change something for testing and then checked it in. Before you check this in and you run your test locally, you can also find that this wasn't the right thing to do. Let's revert my change before you go into review. And it does not only do this, but it does a lot of things. It does all these types. So it's quite extensive list. Where the point, when we go over this in comparison to the Facebook, it can only do UI views and CI layer. So let's go over the test where I did the recursive description. So what is this about? So with this recursive description, you get a recursive description of your whole view. You could also think of this as a replacement for your image, because this is a text representation of your whole hierarchy in your view. So when something is wrong, let's say your x, y is different, and what you can also see in the image will also reflect in this hierarchy. So what you can then choose from is say, hey, I want to have this text view instead of the image. We don't want this, but it's a possibility, because we think still images add the benefit of having a total overview of the whole snapshot. This doesn't tell you much actually in like the whole picture. So as I said, Facebook Snapshot does only the UI view and CI layer. So it is at a benefit, because, well, we don't want to do it right now. We just want to do images. But I think maybe for the future, it could be a possibility to do this sort of test where we do raw types for data requests. It could be useful. And then there's the image difference output, because for developer experience, we want to know or see quickly what is wrong with our snapshot. So for this, I made an example where I changed the layout constraints and to see what the output was with the 0.3 snapshot framework. So what you see then is that you get like a git difference comparison where there is the git, like the reference image on the top and the test image on the bottom. But you don't get these images outputted in a folder in your repository. You have to go to these images yourself and compare them yourself. For images, this isn't very helpful in terms of developer experience, because it takes quite some time to go over these images, download them, and compare them. When we go to Facebook Snapshot, it will actually put out a folder for you called image diff with the reference image, the tested image, and the image that was that contains the actual difference between those. So because with this test the difference is so little, you cannot almost not see it. But this is a value case where you want to use Snapshot, because it's so it's almost not visible with the eye. You want to have this in your snapshot, because this snapshot test can then help you with that. So if you go over the reference, you can see that the line is more to the left. And this is the actual difference. But because the difference is so little, having a snapshot adds this added benefit for you. So this concludes the image difference output. Now if we want to go over the speed comparison, I created a bunch of tests and compared the same tests with the different frameworks. So I run these tests 5 times, measured the speed, and just listed the time it took for this same test. And what you see is that Facebook Snapshot is a little bit faster, but not significant. So it's not twice as fast or something. But one reason that this could be faster is maybe because it uses Objective-C instead of Swift, and it could be a reason. And let's see. Well, that concludes the comparison for now, where we think that point-free snapshot is a valuable choice to create a POC for. So we also want to integrate this in our CI. So for our CI, for our source control at ING, we have GitLab. And GitLab has GitLab runners. And GitLab runners are runners to create tasks for your to run your CI. So the environment looks sort of like this, where you have your merge request, which is work in progress, of course, and you can have GitLab runners, which you can create in a YAML file, and which is then visible here, where you create different stages, and within each stage, you then do a sort of task or work that's being done by the runners. So for this merge request, I created a extra job within the unit test to actually do a snapshot. For example, we also do checks if there aren't any more warnings added to the project. We also have a step for archive and build, but also the snapshot test. And what would be the developer experience for us then? So when a snapshot would fail here, you would see a red cross, and then you can actually download these references images. Because point-free doesn't create this image like folder for you, we created a script that does it for you. And with this script, we then also have the added benefit of having this reference image, this test image, and difference image. And then when the developer comes in and checks in his code and there is something wrong, he wants to compare that. So the comparison image is then being downloaded, and then the user can then use a tool called Kaleidoscope. Kaleidoscope is very useful because it can merge and see the difference in an image. So the use case could actually be the following. The folder would then be downloaded from GitLab, our CI. You would see the difference, the failed and the reference. You would select these images, and then you could see in Kaleidoscope that it would highlight these same images for extra clarification. So this concludes the whole integration or whole POC that I done at ING, where I used this newly point-free framework for integrating the snapshot test for StyleKit. Our next job is to actually create this whole test for the whole framework itself. I now only created tests for only these cells. But at least I think it's already a big improvement for us, because we can also now add our designer to it, we can get more feedback from our designer, and we also now have a clear understanding in what to test, and well, make sure you also automate so you don't forget this. This was it. Thanks. Any questions?
So you were saying that for the what used to be Facebook Snapshot test case, and when we were testing on different devices, you would have to actually run the whole suite of tests on a different device. The point free, is that using something where it's just sort of creating stuff under the hood using the resizing simulator? Or does it actually start up a bunch of different simulators?
So the point free actually uses sizes, and the creator uses like these enums, which under the hood has like pixel sizes that's being used for each test.
Yeah, so which simulator does it run on?
It doesn't matter.
So then the question, what about safe areas?
Sorry.
Safe areas, like they're different on, like depending on the simulator, if it's on the main one or something. Like how do you account for them in Snapshot tests on the point free?
That's a good question. Yeah, we didn't test on that, but what it then it uses the actual pixels of this device. So it could imagine that it also takes account in that, but well, I have to test that furthermore.
So I bet the safe areas will be the same, like those safe areas of the device you're running.
Yeah.
So then they will be dependent on the simulation.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to run a test shortly after. Yeah. Hi.
Point free open source?
Yeah.
And you wrote a script to do the difference?
Yeah.
So could you, in theory, put that script into it and just be device one?
Yeah, I asked this to them if, well, how they think about it. I didn't get any response. I asked this yesterday, but I'm willing to be in contact and add this as a merge request, because we can all benefit of it. Sorry?
Kaleidoscope is not open source.
No, it costs €60 or something. Maybe quite expensive for such a tool, but it's useful. I won it at Swift Island, so.
Are we gonna be back?
Hi.
How often did the test fail?
So,
Once in a week or once in a month?
so on what occasion do you mean?
How often does it fail? How often does it
So
fail?
in practical. So I used snapshot tests in a previous company, because we don't use snapshot testing like at all at our current project. I'm just trying to introduce it, so I don't have any reference from it very recently. But at my last company, last project where I worked on this and I had this is. You also have this situation where you change some view where you think it only reflects one table view, but then in the end it reflects or has impact on 5 other table views where it breaks another thing. So that's where these situations were where this is an added benefit. So how, it is. It matters on how many time you work on views and UI, of course. But I think with every view you make, you also have to create a new snapshot for at least snapshot style kit. So only when you work on that for this example. So I think not that often now for Bankira. Yeah.
Yeah, I always thought with snapshot testing you needed to use like UI automated to go through and take snapshots. I think that's what fast explained it. But it seemed like that's not how it was doing it. It was kind of just instantiating the view controllers and then taking a snapshot like immediately. Seems like it's a lot faster to do it that way.
Yeah.
Is that right? So you don't use automated to do this, right?
No. They use underneath. They use a UI graphical representation. So they actually you actually instantiate they use a class for this. I forgot the name about it, but you don't have to actually run your simulator. It's just simulator is just needed to actually make use of UIKit. You don't need to run the app.
I was writing all the UI, the automated path to tap through the app, and then that itself could be. So this is pretty cool.
Yeah. It could be that it's using UI tests for that, but I don't know, because then you have to click through.
Yeah.
How actually the screenshots which you compare the current results to are made? Are they provided from designers?
Yeah, so this is also possible to create your pixel perfect design, where you closely collaborate with your designer and say, this is what my snapshot is for an iPad, and he can then import it in his comparison tool and say, hey, your radius is not 20 pixel, but 19 or 18. So yeah, it's very helpful in that way.
But do you have experience with such approach?
Yeah.
The designer provides.
Yeah.
And are there, in this case, challenges with some difference in how it renders on device and renders in, I don't know, Sketch or whatever?
Yeah, so Sketch renders different than iOS, but in the end, when you are in contact with your designer and at some point you approve it because this is the best you could do, or you end up explaining that it's not possible what he creates. It could be. At the end, you have an okay from the designer that this is the approved design. And when you make changes, you know that you need to revert your changes. So yeah, I have experience with this with designers, and it was really very helpful.
So you recreate the design on device to be as close as possible to Sketch.
Yes.
And when the designer approves, you take a screenshot from the device.
Well, with that framework, yeah.
No, I mean as a screenshot you're going to compare to.
Oh no, so yeah, the screenshot is then transferred to the designer, and he approved that.
Ah,
Okay. So, thanks.